Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, and today I am going to be non-stop flexing this entire time. So I'm going to be painting the Captain from the Leviathan box set. I've assembled him completely because I could not find a way to manage him with his easy push-fit kind of build, and so it was a detriment. I would have preferred his arms to be separate, and his cape to be separate, but we roll with the punches. Here are all the paints that I used throughout for him, not the base. I'm focusing entirely on him. And then I primed the model with a car primer, essentially. I prefer gray, but I could only find black, because you can use it at any time of the season and pretty much almost every atmosphere, because it's made for outdoors and it has a strong adhesion. Alright, with Corn Red, Mephiston Red, Wild Rider Red, Troll Slayer Orange, and Lugganath Orange, we're going to paint his cape first. I should have done his armor first, but here we are. So, essentially what I did was I took the paints and I thinned them. I thinned them a lot. It's more to say that I got some paint in my water. So they were very thin. I do show a little bit later how I thin them out, but essentially what I do is I start with Corn Red and on the black, and it's thin enough that I apply several coats, and I start applying more coats towards the more raised areas. Then I go to Mephiston Red and I apply these thin down coats on the more raised areas. And essentially what I go is from the darkest to the lightest. And this is more of an artistic kind of thing. There's a little bit of back and forth here and there. And essentially when I get to Wild Rider Red and stuff, I start highlighting, but I start doing like thin lines or cross lines here and there to make it look a little bit like fabric. Then I build up to Troll Slayer Orange, and then very finally some Lugganath Orange. Now there are mixes between Mephiston Red and Wild Rider Red in between steps to help bridge the colors, Wild Rider Red and Troll Slayer Orange and stuff. And I did things a bit differently so you can see the colors I'm actually using at the time and their mixes. And essentially I just thin it down and just keep applying layers until it looks good enough. And then I go on to a lighter color and apply thin lines here and there as I see fit. I just focus on going from the deep trenches to the upper raised areas, which are lighter, and the most raised areas. I could have improved this by having more of the open top flat areas be brighter, but I just focused on the most highest points. So there's room to improve, but this is doable. It just takes a long time. This whole cape took me between an hour and a half and 2 hours in one sitting, and it looks great. And at the very end, to tie all the colors together, because some of them were a bit too extreme, I took down Corn Red and I watered it down heavily until it was a thin wash and applied it all over to tie them all together. Alright, trying to do the same thing with the armor. With Calidor Sky, Cantor Blue, and Rust Gray, we're going to paint the armor. Probably should have chosen some better colors. But start off with a base layer of Calidor Sky all over. Then with Cantor Blue, I watered it down until it was basically a wash, and I kept applying layer upon layer of it into the more shaded areas, essentially going from bright to the dark shade. I probably should have done it from the darkest going up because it would have been more easier to visualize, so I count that as a mistake. And so I do mixes between Calidor Sky and Cantor Blue, and eventually when I go to highlights I redo Calidor Sky, and then I start mixing in some Rust Gray with Calidor Sky. This is really watered down, and I just apply layer upon layer very thinly. It's like 90% water or so, until it goes from a dark to a light. And then I do pure Rust Gray on the edges and tips with some regular paint to highlight, and it's so-so. And then to tile the colors together, because they feel a little bit off, I take Cantor Blue, turn it into a wash, and then apply it all over to tile the colors together. And then with Abaddon Black and Cantor Blue, essentially I mix a little bit of the Cantor Blue with Abaddon Black, and I made these small chips here and there with Calidor Sky in a previous step. I just didn't mention it, but I fill them in with Abaddon Black to make it look like chips and dents. And it doesn't look that good. I'll revisit it later, but this was an early attempt. Alright, with Mournfang Brown, Cadian Flesh Tone, Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint the face. So I start off with the base layer of Mournfang Brown. Then I take Mournfang Brown and mix in some Cadian Flesh Tone and water it down a lot. I actually don't use the Pallid Witch Flesh, I actually bring in a different color liner. And then essentially I just apply a thin layer of this, focusing on the nose, the eyebrows, everything, just the very deep lines between his hair, his earpiece, his face and stuff have the Mournfang Brown. And basically I just keep applying layer upon layer of this watered down Cadian Flesh Tone Mournfang Brown thing until the color is pretty solid. Then I add more Cadian Flesh Tone into the mix, re-highlight again, focusing more on the eyebrows, the nose, of course the tips, mouth and stuff like that, and slowly building up layers until it looks decent enough. And then towards the end, I decide not to use Pallid Witch Flesh because it's bright enough. I take Seraph Sepia as a wash, and I water it down a lot, and then I apply this a few times into places where there's shadow, just to bring out shadow more, but it's very watered down, so it's very subtle shadows. I know it looks a little bit bad here with the camera zoomed in so much, but it actually looks fine. It's just the camera. Alright, with Pallid Witch Flesh, Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White, Dawnstone, and Carrionburg Crimson, we're going to do the hair and some of the extra details. So, Pallid Witch Flesh, basic color, we're going to apply it on top of his hair. Then we're going to take the Bold Titanium White, which is a good white pink that works, and we're just going to tap, tap, tap random spots on his head to bring out the light, and we're going to focus on the front parts. Then we're going to take Dawnstone, and we're going to water it down heavily till it's super diluted, and we're going to apply multiple layers onto his chin and face to make it look like he has a scruffy beard or like a 5 o'clock shadow. Then with Carrionburg Crimson, we're going to apply some water down of this towards where his ear is to show like the reddish pink of his skin against the metals and stuff like that. So with Screaming Skull, Pallid Witch Flesh, Mournfang Brown, Abaddon Black, we're going to do the purity seals, the paper. So unfortunately you can't really see the colors except for a split second because my hand's in the way. So basically Screaming Skull is the base color, I apply all over. Then I do a mix of Screaming Skull and Pallid Witch Flesh and pick out the edges, the flats, and the folds. Then I go and do some pure Pallid Witch Flesh on a fine highlighting along the edges and flats and folds. Just some thin lines I paint straight up and down to sort of like feather in some color. But yeah, and then I take Mournfang Brown and turn it into a very thin wash. I apply it all over, make sure it doesn't pool too much in some of the recesses. Then once that dries, usually with the help of a hairdryer, I then take a little bit of it on a fine brush and apply directly into the recesses I really want to try to guide it and create the shadows. And then once that's done, I take Abaddon Black and the thinnest brush I have and do basically dots, dashes, and script on all the purity seals. And you have to make sure it's watered down well enough that it flows right, but not so watered down that it beads. And yeah, surprisingly, the scripts came out pretty well. Any excess water on the brush, you just touch a paper towel with it, and it'll take care of the flooding, and so that when you apply it on the paper thing, it doesn't overflow everywhere, it's just thin lines. Alright, with Emperor's Children, Guilliman Flesh, and I do not use Pallid Witch Flesh. I thought I would need it, but no. So basically, I take the wax of the purity seals, I apply the Emperor's Children all over, take Guilliman Flesh, water down heavily, and apply it all over. Then I take Emperor's Children, water down, and I highlight pretty much 90% of the entire thing, including the center. Just paint straight lines up and down to sort of create a transitional color. Then wash again with Guilliman Flesh, water down, then re-highlight. And basically I keep doing this process until I have like a shading of going from dark to light into highlight. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Alright, so with Dawnstone, Nuln Oil, and Administrative Grey, we're going to do the Crux terminatus on his shoulder and his right knee. So we're going to start out with Dawnstone all over. Then we're going to apply a slightly watered down Nuln Oil all over. Then we're going to highlight pretty much everything except the deep dark recesses with Dawnstone. Then we're going to re-highlight or refill it in with Nuln Oil again. Then we're going to re-highlight everything with Dawnstone, just covering all the edges, the tips, the tops, all that stuff. And then we're going to apply Nuln Oil again. And then we're going to re-highlight the most raised areas and stuff with Dawnstone, and then we're going to do Dawnstone and with a mix of Administrative Grey, sort of 1-to-1-ish on the most raised areas, basically the tips, the top tips and stuff, the top halves of each crux. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, and that's it. Alright, with Corn Red, Mephiston Red, Wild Rider Red, Troll Slayer Orange, Lugganath Orange, we're going to paint the gems on the Crux terminatuses, essentially. Paint them all Corn Red. They're basically like pyramids. Then we're going to, with Mephiston Red, we're going to cover everything with corn that was painted with Corn Red except the very base of each of these gem pyramids. Then with Wild Rider Red, we're going to paint essentially the edges of the gems and a little bit spilling into the center of the gems, the top half of the pyramid. Then with Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to paint the edges of the gems leading up, and with Lugganath Orange, we're going to place a dot of it towards the tip. That's it. Alright, with Doombull Brown, Gorthor Brown, and Nuln Oil, we're going to paint the handle on their sword. So basically, Doombull Brown first, then fill it in with Nuln Oil, then thin strips of Gorthor Brown along the edges of the circle handle parts. Alright, going to do the white shields and shoulder pad with Ulthuan Grey and Pallid Witch Flesh, but then I realized that Pallid Witch Flesh looks terrible next to Ulthuan Grey, so I go back and refill everything with Ulthuan Grey. So basically I take Ulthuan Grey and paint the white of the shoulders and the shields. Alright, with these micron pens of red and blue, I'm going to paint squares basically on the shields and the shoulder pads of red and blue. And essentially this is just to create the basic outline because I find it's faster and easier to do with this. Unfortunately, these are 0.45 millimeters and not 0.25. 0.25 would dig more into the paint and be sharper. These are unfortunately the smallest I could get in these colors. They're not too good, but at least they do a proper outline. Now with Mephiston Red and Calidor Sky, we fill in these squares with their appropriate color. I forgot to get footage for the Calidor Sky, but essentially, yeah, I just fill it in with a fine brush, the Mephiston Red on the red and Calidor Sky on the blue. Alright, with Carrick Stone, Seraph Sephia, and Screaming Soul, we're going to paint the name plates that are on his right leg and right shoulder. So Carrick Stone, base color, and I wasn't able to get the footage of Seraph Sephia. Basically, I just covered in Seraph Sephia, that's it. Then re-highlight all the edges and little feathering with Carrick Stone, and then do a fine highlight with Screaming Skull along the edges and tips. That's it. Alright, with Abaddon Black, I paint the letters. Now, I actually don't have any footage of this, and that's on purpose, because I could not record this and get it right. So I have to keep it like right up to my face and paint the letters. So basically, here's essentially what I did. I got Abaddon Black, and I watered it down a bit till it flowed well off the brush. I took my teeniest, tiniest tipped brush, and I painted, like, slowly did straight lines up and down and slowly moved the brush to the thing until I hit it. So how you paint words is you start off with the center letters. I did Ultra, which is 5 letters, so the T is in the center, so I did the T first, then the R to its right, and then the L to its left, and then I do the last letters on the edges, with some bits and bobs. Now, looking back, if I were to do this again, probably the faceplate would be far more plain as a start, and I would paint the letters in, and then I would retouch up certain bits and pieces here and there with the color of the faceplate, then retouch up back and forth with the color black of the lettering. And so this was just my first try, and it turned out pretty well. I tried to do that fancy calligraphy thing where like the T is like 2 lines next to each other and stuff. You can somewhat see it, but it's just the pacing and stuff of some letters is a little off, trying to be fancy. But it is a good first try, and it was a very difficult thing to do. I had to do it very slowly and methodically. I basically painted a line like 3 or 4 times on each spot with the paint. And yeah. Alright, with Hoeth Blue, Rust Grey, Fenrisian Grey, and Abaddon Black, we're redoing the chipping on the armor. It just looks terrible compared to some of the other things, and so it stands out. So we're going to re-highlight most of the edges with Hoeth Blue. It's a bright, good, solid color. And yeah, it works on the highlights. I basically re-highlight all of the edges, the armor, hands, fists, everything, fingers, yeah. Then with Rust Grey, I do a fine highlight on the more raised edges, essentially, like the legs is the top of the knee. On the shoulder pad, it's the top circle part of the shoulder pad, stuff like that. And then I do the first chips. So the chips, I do like kind of a thin, yet somewhat basically thin to thick line of Rust Grey, randomly in different directions. Then I take Fenrisian Grey and I sort of fill in the top or bottom part. I basically fill in half of each of the chips with Fenrisian Grey. It's a bright color, cover like 50 to 80% of each chip. It's just what looks good. And then I take Abaddon Black, make sure it's watered down so it flows properly, and then I try to fill in about half of the size of each chips. Some are better than others, but this looks better. Alright, with Abaddon, Dawnstone, and Administrative Gray, we're going to paint the gaps in his armor, the black seal stuff. So basically, fill it all in with Chaos Black, then with some Dawnstone, I paint the ribbed edges, kind of mess up here and there. After a few layers of this, I then take Administrative Gray and apply it on the most raised edges. I then take a wash of Abaddon Black and apply it in order to fill in to fix the mistakes I made and tone down the bright gray, and it works. Alright, with Micro Set, I'm going to take decals, apply it on some putty so that the back of the decal is solid. Then I'm going to apply the Micro Set onto it with a brush until it becomes loose. Then I'm going to apply Micro Set on the area it's going to go, and then I scrape the the decal onto the spot and apply some Micro Set over it to help bend it and make it conform to the mold around it. Yeah, and I do this a bunch more times, but I ain't showing that because it's difficult to get it on camera. Alright, back to these colors. Abaddon Black, Dawnstone, and Administrative Gray. I'm going to paint the bolt gun casing, or the storm bolter casing. So, flat Abaddon Black, then a mix of Abaddon Black and Dawnstone. I'm going to highlight all the edges and like these flat planes that are on it to basically catch light. Then I'm going to add more Dawnstone into the mix. And then I'm going to do pure Dawnstone, re-highlighting the same thing but less. And then a thin line of Administrative Gray on the most raised highlights and edges and stuff and the center plane. But it is too blocky, it doesn't look good enough. So then I take Nuln Oil and apply a few coats here and there to sort of fix these mistakes, and I re-highlight just a little bit with like Administrative Gray, just a little bit between one of the layers. So the layer, Nuln Oil, Administrative Gray, Nuln Oil, a dot of Administrative Gray. Alright, with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, I apply this all over the model, but this time I add a little bit of water to help it flow better, and this matte varnish is good, but it has this sort of whitening effect, and I wanted to add a little bit of water to remove that. And I applied like 2 coats of this over each of the decals to make sure they weren't shiny anymore. Alright, now on to metals. With a Vallejo acrylic steel, gunmetal gray, duraluminum, and the washes Nuln Oil and Seraph Sepia, we're going to paint the metals, or at least the steel metals. So we're going to start off with the bolt gun casing, the wires on his back, and certain pieces of metal here and there with steel. Then we're going to apply Nuln Oil all over to add shadow. Then we're going to take gunmetal gray and basically highlight everything except the deepest, darkest recesses and stuff with gunmetal gray, basically painting 90% of the metal. Then we're going to finish off with a light layer of duraluminum on all the edges, the fine edges as best we can. Now, in some places I mess up a bit, so I take some watered down Nuln Oil to help blend them together or fix some things. And I put some Seraph Sepia into his shoulder pad, the top metal pieces, but that doesn't look too good, and so I go back with some maybe gunmetal gray to fix it up. I don't know, metals seem to just like completely elude me. And as far as his sword, basically I apply steel, then I apply gunmetal gray covering most of it, and then duraluminum, the bright steel on the edges and center of the sword. Because I can't really have easy access to both sides of the sword, I'm just going to leave it as is. Alright, with Hashut Copper, Castellax Bronze, Seraph Sepia, and Sycorax Bronze, we're going to paint all the gold with bronze. So we're going to start off with a layer of Hashut Copper all over, including the sword, his chest, his emblems and stuff like that, like little skulls and stuff that he has on his hands and elbows. And his gun also has one as well, and the ammo casings. Then we're going to fill in the gaps in between with Castellax bronze. Then we're going to apply Seraph Sepia inside. Then once that is done, we're going to go back with Hash Up Copper and do an overbrushing to bring out the shine and fix out any messes or stuff like that. And then once that's done, we're going to do a final fine Sycorax bronze overbrushing on the most raised areas, most picked out stuff to make them shine better. And that is the gold. I then glue him to this base I quickly threw together. And done. Wow, this was a interesting project. So I've been bored with the Ultramarine color scheme, but this time I decided to just try to flex and push myself as far as I possibly could to the best of my abilities. That cape was an incredible 10 out of 10. Shoot, I'd even give it an 11 out of 10 for how much it pushed me, but I can see how I can make it better. His armor was a bit difficult because, I don't know, just Space Marine armor seems to be difficult for me. The medals are also difficult, but like, a lot of things went well. The Purity Seals, incredible. The Crux terminatus, incredible. His face, really, really, really good. The gold, really, really, really good. The chips on his armor, some were a hit, some were a miss. On the back, on his back, the chips are good. On some other areas, they're not as good or not so good. But his armor looks worn and dented. His base does not detract from him. He looks really, really good. The emblems and all the extra details, the red squares, blue squares, the the decals, they look great. They look pretty good. They enhance the model. They add more character, more flavor to him. Because his shields before, without them, he kind of would look a bit dull. But the shields add some more eye-catching stuff, or break the monotony of his blue armor and stuff. Adds more character to him. So it's probably one of the best models I've painted in a long time. I really pushed myself. There's some things I could have done better, but it's probably because the model is in one piece. I would prefer to have done some more special stuff with a sword, but I couldn't easily have done that with both sides. And of course, time was ticking, and it's taking forever. The medals are okay. The gold is pretty good, but his cape is probably the best thing I did on him. Very impressive. And that's about it. I'm probably going to do one more kit. Oh yeah, I'm going to do one more kit definitely from the Leviathan box set. Then I'm going to move on to more cooler things. And yeah, so like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, and more to come. Bye.